I don't believe it. And here's the other thing. You're going to have China and Japan and all of Asia and all of these other countries, addresses our country. Right now, we're at the cleanest we've ever been, and that's very important to me. But if we're clean, but every other place on earth is dirty, that's not so good. So I want clean air, I want clean water, very important.
How's everybody doing? My name is Anthony Brian Logan, and today we're going to talk about what you just saw, which is Donald Trump talking about the federal government's report on climate change in a kind of dismissive way. If you don't know what I'm talking about, let me back up a little bit here so you get a little bit more context into what's going on. Now, the federal government of the U.S. is required to put out an annual report that details the effects of climate change. In the report, it was doom and gloom. It's going to wreck the economy. It's going to be horrible for generations to come. This, that, and the third. Trump is looking at it like, that's not really a big deal when the reporter asked him. Because they asked that question about the economy. He's like, he doesn't really believe it. We'll get to more of what he said in just a moment. But I think the same way Trump thinks in this particular situation. I don't think it's really a big deal. I really don't believe it. Where's the evidence for climate change? You know, some people say that's a dangerous mindset to have, to want evidence because the science can't be changed. The science is proven. The science is found. Wait a minute. I'm not a rocket scientist. I'm not Albert Einstein. I'm not some kind of 10 million IQ person, but I know how to read a dictionary. In the dictionary, it says that science is a study of the natural world around us, meaning that it's always going to be something that changes, something that's different. Science is not something that you can just cite and say it can't be disproven, it can never change. That is not true. Look at Pluto. What is that now? I mean, I was always taught when I was a kid, it's a planet. Okay. When I was in earth science and science in general, whatever, that's a planet. But now all of a sudden, oh, it's an asteroid. It's a space object. It's all this, that, and the third. What is it really? I don't know, because the science changed. At one point, the prevailing thought in science or religion, whatever you want to actually cite in this particular case, but the prevailing thought was that the sun revolved around the earth. Now we know that's not true. The earth revolves around the sun. Things change in science. Things that are possible today were not possible before, and somebody before would say, oh, that's not possible because science says it's not. You know, a lot of technology that we have is going to change the way that science actually operates in the world. So to say that you have cited science, therefore a thing cannot be questioned or it cannot be disproven is just not true based upon the definition of science. Science is a study that tries to constantly disprove what it believes is actually true. So it doesn't make any sense. And to get back to what Trump said at the beginning of this particular video, he was saying that you have other places that are dirty, because he kind of broke it up in a little bit. If you didn't really quite catch that, he was saying China, India, whatever. The point he was making is that if you impose all these regulations on us, which is the actual end game here, if you want to have all these climate change, climate science people coming to the federal government and enact certain rules to try and prevent so-called climate change, all they're going to do is just up the EPA regulations. And that's just going to push out industries that cannot meet the standard that they set to India, to China, to other countries that don't have these types of regulations. And the same CO2 that was emitted here in the U.S. is going to go up to the same atmosphere from China and India rather than from the USA. So if you really want to fight climate change, how are you going to do it? By simply offshoring the pollution or offshoring the CO2 emissions or offshoring whoever they is, say is causing the climate change. It does not make any sense. So what he said there was right. Why just focus on the U.S. and trying to punish us with these crazy laws that stifle business, while at the same time you allow other countries to not have those same laws? They're going to get the jobs and the money that we gave to them via these crazy rules and regulations. Now, I'm not saying that I want to have a dirty world. People always revert to that. People that believe in climate change, when I say you can't really prove it, CO2 emission is not necessarily a thing that's going to cause the weather to change, they'll say, well, you just want to have a dirty world. You want to have dirty water. You want to have dirty land. You want to have dirty air. No, I don't. I want to have a world that is as free from possible of pollution, but pollution is not necessarily the same thing as something that will cause climate change. How do we know that dirty air causes the climate to change? It's weather at the end of the day. I mean, I've heard about weather controlling machines and whatnot, but I've not really seen one in person. If you have a weather machine, then at that point you can control the weather. But just by imposing rules and regulations doesn't make any sense. I mean, I'm not sure how that's going to actually control the weather. If things are so bad, so much doom and gloom is happening right now, how are you going to enact rules on a government level to actually reverse that trend, to change the weather of the earth, which is much bigger than any kind of government can ever really imagine? From the outside that we can see, the land and the top of the water, to the depths of the water, down to the crust, mantle core, etc. And one more thing, you got this big giant ball in the sky called the sun. It is humongous, bigger than we can really even fathom being here on Earth. I mean, we know how big it is to a certain extent, but it's hard to see. Like, you may see it in the sky, you might catch a glimpse of it, but you don't really understand how big that is. It's humongous. If the sun is changing, which we know by science that it does, that's going to have a bigger impact on climate than what we can do here on Earth. I think that we are a little bit too full of ourselves to think that we can just control the weather so easily by emitting CO2 from cars and whatnot. And speaking about CO2 is not just a gas that is emitted with pollution, with dirty air. You may see a bunch of dirty air coming from a factory and you see, oh, that's a bunch of CO2. Well, CO2 is a gas that may not necessarily have smoke and stuff associated with it. The smoke and stuff, that's just smoke. It's not necessarily the CO2. All the cows farting and stuff on farms emits CO2 as well. So what are we going to do? We're going to become vegetarian? Then how are you going to have agriculture without emitting CO2 from these tractors and whatnot? I mean, you tell me. I'm just trying to figure out how we're going to go about doing this. Okay. Where's the evidence? That's all I want to know. Show me some evidence, hardcore physical evidence of climate change, and then tell me that it can never be disproven with science. And I think I'll say this last thing, and then I wrap it on up with a nice bow on top. You got guys like Al Gore and others that profit off of so-called climate change. They go around the world giving speeches, giving talks, giving lectures. Meanwhile, they live in this big compound like Al Gore does in Nashville that consumes like 21 times the average U.S. household worth of energy. I mean, what are we really talking about? You flying on private jets, that's a big carbon guzzler. You're living in the biggest state, another big carbon guzzler, but you want to tell me to cut down on my CO2 footprint. You want to tell me to cut down on things that I'm doing that could so-called aid in climate change. It's a bunch of BS. A guy like Al Gore, I equate to a fake preacher, a fake pastor. You're preaching the false prophecy to enrich yourself. Okay. And the end goal for them is just to get regulations passed, to get certain things that they want to have done. You want to get money into green energy. You want to get money into this. You want to get money into that to fill your own pockets. I heard somebody say that Germany is a leader in renewable energy. Same thing with China. That's all bogus. China uses coal mostly for their energy production. They have a lot of solar panels there. They produce a lot, number one, because they sell a lot. That's where everything is made in the world. But number two, they don't have the access to oil, which is a much more efficient way of being able to have energy available for people. First of all, these solar panels have a really big energy footprint to produce them. Look at all the materials that go into it, all the plastic, metal, and the production time. I mean, show me a solar panel production factory. I can guarantee you it's not run on solar panels. Maybe I'll be wrong in one case out of 1,000, but for the most part, you're talking about coal, maybe hydroelectric at most, but mostly coal. That's what the world runs on, coal and oil. As I close, I want to say one more thing about all this data that we have. Oh, this is the coldest year on record. It's the hottest year on record. It's the most violent hurricane season on record. How far does record really go back? Okay, according to scientists, the world is billions of years old, millions of years old, a quadrillion years old, very old. You only have other data going back to like the 1800s. So you're talking about 200 years max of weather data, and we're determining worldwide climate change, catastrophic events from that. That is a blink of an eye when you're looking at the total age of the world. How did we have the ice age? How did we get out of the ice age? How did all the land formations on Earth actually happen? I mean, we got to think about all these things before we can just simply say climate change is real. Pollution is real, but that's not necessarily the same thing as climate change. Just because the area is dirty does not mean that that's the only area that can produce CO2, just like I said with the cows on these big CAFOs. So I'll pretty much leave it at that. What say you? Do you think that climate change is real? Do you think it's not real? If you think either way, please explain to me why. I'd love to know your particular point of view. If you think climate change is real, do you think that government intervention with regulations would be able to stop it? And if that's the case, then why do we just offshore those jobs, offshore that pollution to a different country like China, and have the same CO2 go up to the atmosphere? What are we going to do about that? You're going to go to Xi Jinping and say, hey, cut out all the factories? How are you going to be get your iPhone, all that kind of good stuff like that? We don't want to talk about that. We just want to look at things that we can see right in front of us and say that has to go because it interferes with the climate. But do you think I'm right? Do you think guys like Al Gore and other climate change people are just trying to get money? Is it a big scam for green energy, for other kinds of energy? Whatever your thoughts are, please let me know in the comments below.